Welcome, friends, to another gentle tale from the Chestnut Hollow Journal. Today we return to the cozy woods, where small creatures go about their quiet days in warmth and wonder. Find yourself a comfortable spot, perhaps a warm drink by your side, and let's step together into the peaceful world of Chestnut Hollow. The village fair and other stories. The first hint of summer drifted into Oak Hollow with warm breezes, buzzing bees, and wildflowers bursting in color across the meadows. Hazel had just finished hanging fresh herbs to dry when Pip darted through her doorway, tail twitching with excitement. "They're putting up stalls in the meadow by the stream," he squeaked breathlessly. "The fair is coming. A real fair, Hazel." Hazel raised an eyebrow, but smiled. "Already? I thought they only held it once the hay was cut." "Well, they're early this year," Pip replied, practically bouncing. "There'll be honey cakes and games and music, and I'm going to try everything." Word spread quickly. Reed set aside his pestle and mortar with quiet interest, already considering what herbs he might trade. Bramble polished his spectacles and muttered about finding books or ink stalls. Even Thistle perked his ears when he overheard, though he tried to disguise his curiosity with a gruff, "Humph, just a bunch of noise and nonsense." But when the day came, all of them went. The meadow was transformed. Bright awnings stretched across wooden frames, stalls piled high with goods, ribbons fluttering from branches, and laughter ringing across the air. The scent of roasted seeds, sugared berries, and warm bread wafted everywhere. Hazel led the mice in a neat line, each clutching her paw to avoid losing one another in the crowd. Pip darted ahead now and then, only to circle back with cries of, "Look, a hoop toss! Look, a squirrel balancing on a rope." At one stall, Reed found a kindly mole selling jars of dried herbs. They swapped cuttings, trading secrets about soil and shade. Bramble, meanwhile, spent nearly an hour talking to a traveling crow who bound books in bark and sinew. The crow even sold him a new inkwell carved from bone, which Bramble clutched as though it were a priceless relic. Hazel sampled honey cakes, buying a packet to share later. The mice squeaked happily when she passed them around. Even Thistle, after much grumbling, accepted one and chewed thoughtfully until his spines flattened slightly in contentment. But it was Pip who stole the show. At the fair center stood a large wooden wheel with ribbons attached. Contestants grabbed a ribbon, the wheel spun, and prizes were awarded to whoever's ribbon aligned with a marked peg when the wheel stopped. Pip begged Hazel for permission, and she finally relented with a sigh and a smile. The wheel spun, ribbons fluttered, and Pip squeezed his eyes shut. When it stopped, his ribbon pointed to a peg carved with a tiny star. The crowd cheered as the stallholder handed him a prize, a little pouch of marbles made from polished river stones. Pip strutted back, chest puffed out. "See? I told you I'd win something grand." "Grand?" Thistle snorted. "They're rocks. Special rocks," Pip corrected, already clicking them together happily. The sun dipped low, lanterns lit the stalls, and music filled the meadow as creatures danced in circles. Hazel sat with Reed and Bramble, watching the mice whirl in dizzy laughter. For a moment, she leaned back, breathing in the warm night air, the sounds of joy around her. Life, she thought, was made richer by these small, shared moments. When at last they trudged home beneath the stars, tired but content, Hazel carried not only honey cakes and herbs, but also the memory of a day when Oak Hollow had joined the wider world in celebration. A week after the fair, Hazel received a neatly folded note delivered by a passing magpie. It announced in curly script, "All are invited to the summer baking contest, to be held beneath the willow grove 3 days hence. Prizes will be awarded for taste, presentation, and originality." Hazel read it aloud at breakfast. Pip immediately leapt to his feet. "We have to enter. Hazel, you'll win for sure." "Oh no," Hazel said quickly, shaking her head. "I bake to feed you all, not to win prizes. But your pies are the best in the whole hollow," Reed said seriously. Even Bramble nodded. Thistle, predictably, scoffed. "Contests are for show-offs." Yet even he eyed Hazel's berry tarts with undisguised longing. Despite her reluctance, Hazel found herself persuaded. Perhaps it wouldn't hurt to share her baking beyond Oak Hollow, and besides, she was curious what others might create. Over the next 2 days, she experimented. She baked honey scones glazed with mint, a carrot loaf spiced with fennel, and tiny acorn flour cakes filled with blackberry jam. The mice eagerly offered to test each batch, though Hazel suspected they simply wanted excuses to eat more sweets. On the contest day, the Willow Grove buzzed with activity. Long tables groaned with entries, seed loaves decorated with flower petals, candied nuts arranged in patterns, even a layered cake topped with sugared violets. The air smelled heavenly. Hazel set her acorn cakes neatly on a plate and stepped back nervously. Judges, a pair of owls with impressive spectacles, strode solemnly from entry to entry, tasting, murmuring, and taking notes. Hazel clasped her paws and tried not to fret. Pip, meanwhile, darted between tables, pointing out favorites. "Look at this one. Oh, and this." When the judges reached Hazel's plate, they sampled carefully. One owl raised his brow. The other gave a soft hoot of approval. Hazel's heart fluttered. At last, the results were announced. Hazel's cakes were awarded second place, praised for delicate flavor and fine texture. First prize went to a family of field voles who had created an astonishing honey lattice tart. Hazel was relieved. She had no desire to stand in the spotlight. A second place felt just right. Her friends, however, cheered as though she had won a crown. Pip even ran circles around her, shouting, "Hazel's the champion." Afterward, as they shared the remaining cakes with anyone who passed, Hazel realized the true joy wasn't in prizes, but in offering food freely, turning strangers into friends. She returned home that evening with an empty plate and a full heart. While Hazel basked in the memory of the contest, Reed grew restless. He had been trading herbs steadily, but his small garden was crowded and disorganized. One morning he announced, "I'm making a proper healing garden, a place where anyone can come, rest, and mend." Hazel looked up from kneading dough. "That sounds wonderful." Pip tilted his head. "Like, with beds and chairs?" "With herbs," Reed explained patiently. "Beds of herbs, arranged by their uses: lavender for calm, chamomile for rest, yarrow for cuts, mint for clearing the head." Bramble offered to draw a detailed plan, and Hazel promised cuttings of rosemary. Even Thistle grunted approval. Better than cluttering your hut with weeds. For weeks they worked. Hazel helped dig neat beds. The mice carried pebbles to mark paths. Bramble designed wooden labels with inked names. Reed himself transplanted each herb with care, murmuring to them as though they were old friends. At last, the garden took shape. A circle divided into sections, each with its own scent and purpose. A small bench beneath a hawthorn tree invited visitors to sit. Soon word spread. A robin with a sprained wing came to rest among the lavender. A hedgehog pup with a scratch received yarrow poultice. A rabbit weary from travel napped on the bench, lulled by chamomile's gentle scent. Reed moved quietly through it all, tending, guiding, offering calm. Hazel sometimes watched from her oak, pride swelling at her friend's quiet dedication. One evening, as the sun set and the garden glowed golden, Reed stood with soil on his paws and a rare smile on his face. "It's not much," he said softly. "It's everything," Hazel replied. And so the healing garden became another heart of Oak Hollow, a place where the weary found rest, and where Reed, the quiet herbalist, finally felt his work take root not just in soil, but in community. The summer sun glowed on the hollow, long golden rays spilling through leaves and dappling the ground. Life had taken on a gentle rhythm. Hazel baked and tended her kitchen. Bramble cataloged his books. Reed weeded his healing garden, and Thistle wandered the hedgerows with his gruff mutterings, pretending not to enjoy the warmth. But Pip was restless. Every day it's the same. He groaned one morning, lying sprawled on Hazel's doorstep. Wake up, eat, help Hazel, chase mice about, go to sleep. There's so much out there to see, and we never know what's beyond the next field. Hazel looked up from her basket of laundry. We've all been plenty far, Pip. Remember the fair? But that was only the meadow. Pip protested. There are woods, hills, streams. We don't even know what lies on the other side of Briar Ridge. Someone should draw a map of it all. Hazel chuckled. And who would do such a thing? Pip sprang upright, tail flicking. Me, of course. I'll make the very first grand map of Oak Hollow and beyond. Bramble, overhearing this declaration, lowered his spectacles. Cartography is a serious science, Pip. It requires careful observation, accuracy, and adventure. Pip interrupted. That's exactly what I'll do. Hazel tried to protest, but Pip was already fetching scraps of parchment from Bramble, a bit of charcoal from Reed, and a pouch Hazel used for flour dust, which Pip insisted would be perfect for storing his tools. The next morning, he set off. The little mice insisted on joining him, squeaking with delight at the idea of exploring. Hazel sighed, but gave her blessing, instructing them all to be careful and return before sundown. Their first expedition was to Briar Ridge. The climb was small for most creatures, but to Pip and the mice it felt like a mountain. They scrambled up, paws dusty, whiskers twitching. At the top, Pip paused dramatically and unrolled his parchment. Here it is, he announced, Briar Ridge. Height, enormous view, spectacular. He scratched marks onto the page, dots for trees, a squiggly line for the path, and a little paw print for where they stood. The mice peered over his shoulder. It doesn't look like the ridge at all, one whispered. It will once I finish, Pip said airily, adding what he called important cartographer's symbols. From the ridge, they spied the sparkling ribbon of a brook winding through the fields below. Pip led the way down, the mice scurrying after him, until they reached its banks. There they discovered smooth stones warm from the sun, and Pip drew another squiggly line with careful notation. The Grand Brook, full of fish and excellent for skipping stones. By midday, they had cataloged half a dozen spots. The tallest thistle, the rabbit warren, the hollow log. Pip's map was crowded with shapes and scribbles, many of which only he could decipher. But to the mice, his seriousness made it magical. When the sun dipped low, they returned triumphant, though their paws were sore and their fur dusty. Pip unrolled his map before Hazel, Reed, Bramble, and Thistle. Behold, he cried, the first part of the grand map. Hazel tilted her head, trying to make sense of the tangle of lines. Well, it certainly looks full. Bramble adjusted his spectacles, frowning. That symbol looks like a squashed beetle. It's a thistle, Pip protested. Thistle the hedgehog, hearing his name, snorted. That looks nothing like me. Not you, a real thistle, Pip exclaimed. Despite the confusion, Reed gave a small approving nod. You put a great deal of effort into this. Effort matters. Hazel smiled gently. It may not be perfect, Pip, but it's yours. And perhaps, one day, others will follow it and see what you've seen. Pip beamed, clutching the parchment proudly. That night he lay awake in his little nest, dreaming of where the next day's adventure might take him, his map forever growing, like the world itself. While Pip chased his maps and Hazel managed her kitchen, Bramble found himself deep in the hush of his library. His shelves bulged with books, scrolls, and scraps of parchment collected from travelers, copied carefully by his own paw. He often muttered, There's no story too small to preserve. Even a hedgehog's recipe for nettle soup deserves its place. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled faintly in the distance, Bramble noticed a thin, dusty ledger wedged behind a row of Urgles. Curious, he tugged it free. Its leather cover was cracked, the ink faded, but on the first page was written. Bramble's ears perked. He had never seen this title before. He settled into his chair, spectacles slipping down his nose, and began to read. The tale spoke of an old oak on the far side of the brook, a tree said to stand guard over the forest paths. Creatures of long ago had left offerings at its roots: acorns, berries, wildflowers. In return, travelers were said to find safety and sure footing. But over time, the tale claimed the oak had been forgotten. Now it stood alone, a silent sentinel, waiting for friends to return. Bramble's whiskers twitched. He adored such half-true stories, where history blurred with myth. He read the ledger twice more before evening fell. The next day, he gathered Hazel, Reed, Pip, and Thistle. "I've discovered a story worth investigating," he declared. "Another ghost story?" Thistle muttered. "Not at all," Bramble replied, puffing his chest. "It's history, the Oak of Willow's watch. We must see it for ourselves." Though Hazel raised an eyebrow, Hazel smiled at Bramble, who carried the forgotten ledger under his arm. Perhaps stories were not only to be kept in books, but to be lived too. One particularly hot night in midsummer, Hazel found herself restless. She opened her little window, hoping for a breeze, and sat at her table with a candle flickering low. The hollow was quiet save for the distant hum of crickets. Then came a soft tap at her door. Startled, Hazel rose. At this hour, she opened it to find a tiny field mouse, no bigger than one of her own little charges, standing nervously with a bundle on his back. His fur was damp with dew, his eyes wide. "Please, ma'am," he squeaked. "I didn't mean to wake you. I'm traveling through, and I've lost my way. Might I rest here a while?" Hazel's heart softened. "Of course, dear. Come in." She fetched him a blanket, poured a mug of warm milk, and set a slice of bread before him. The mouse ate quickly, glancing about with awe at Hazel's tidy home. "My name's Lark," he said at last. "I was following the path to the hills, but it grew dark, and I thought I saw shadows behind me. I got frightened." Hazel soothed him. "The forest can feel large at night, but you're safe now." As he curled up on a cushion near the hearth, Hazel thought of her own younger days, when she too had traveled uncertain paths. She watched over him until her candle guttered low. In the morning, her friends gathered, curious about the visitor. Pip was instantly fascinated. "Did you come from far? Do you know new songs? Do you have maps?" Lark laughed shyly and explained he was headed to an uncle's home beyond the ridge. Bramble insisted on giving him a proper sketch of the roads. Pip pressed one of his marbles into his paw, and Reed handed him dried herbs for strength. When Lark departed, Hazel stood at her door, watching him vanish into the bright fields. She felt a quiet gladness, knowing Oak Hollow had offered kindness to a stranger. That evening, as she tucked the mice in a bed, one asked, "Hazel, do you think he'll remember us?" Hazel kissed their heads. "Yes, little one. Every kindness becomes a story we carry with us. And I think Lark's story will hold Oak Hollow close for a very long time." And somewhere beyond a ridge, a young mouse walked lighter, clutching gifts from friends he'd only just met, certain the world was not as lonely as it had seemed. For many days after Lark's departure, Oak Hollow settled into a rhythm again. Hazel tended her kitchen, Pip added feverishly to his map, Bramble researched curious legends, Reed dried herbs in tidy bundles, and Thistle dozed beneath his favorite bramble patch. The days were long, heavy with summer's warmth, the brook low from lack of rain, but the stillness ended suddenly. One afternoon, while the mice were gathering wild strawberries, the sky grew strange. a greenish hue like tinted glass. The birds hushed. The air pressed heavy, thick as wool. Hazel's whiskers twitched uneasily as she glanced upward. By evening, black clouds had rolled in, their edges torn by streaks of lightning. The first rumbles of thunder shook the hollow. "Storm's coming," Thistle muttered, eyes narrowing. "A big one." Hazel herded the mice indoors, shuttered her windows, and stoked the hearth against the coming chill. But Pip darted back and forth in agitation, clutching his half-finished map. "I was going to chart the bend in the brook tomorrow. What if the storm washes it away before I record it?" "Pip," Hazel said firmly, "maps can wait. This storm looks fierce. Stay inside." The rain began as a patter, then escalated into a drumming torrent. The brook swelled, rushing and roaring. Trees whipped in the wind, leaves tearing loose like frightened birds. Hazel held the mice close as thunder cracked above. Yet amid the chaos, a sharp knock sounded at her door. Hazel started. Who could be out in such weather? She opened it to find Bramble, soaked and breathless. "The oak," he gasped. "Willow's watch. It's in danger. The brook's risen, and the banks are crumbling near its roots. If it washes away..." Hazel's heart clenched. "But Bramble, it's too dangerous." He shook his head fiercely. "That tree holds history, stories. It cannot be lost. I need help." Before Hazel could respond, Pip darted forward, charcoal-stained paws clutching his map. "I'll come. We can find a fastest path. I've charted it." Reed, appearing from the storm with his cloak plastered to his fur, spoke in his calm voice. "I'll bring ropes. If the roots loosen, we may bind them." Thistle, gruff but resolute, growled, "Fools, the lot of you. But if you're going, I'm not letting you get washed away without me." Hazel, though torn with worry for the mice, could not let her friends go alone. She left them in the care of a kindly neighbor vole, and together the five of them plunged into the storm. The rain lashed their fur, lightning flickering overhead. Pip's map nearly tore from his paws, but he shouted above the roar of the wind. "This way. Follow me." His symbols, once mocked, now guided them past flooded dips and tangled roots, leading them quickly to the clearing. And there they saw it. The great oak, Willow's watch, standing proud but imperiled. The brook had swelled to a raging torrent, eating at the soil, tearing away at roots long buried. The ground around the tree sagged dangerously. "Quickly!" Bramble cried. Reed threw down ropes. Hazel and Thistle dug with frantic paws to shift mud back into place. Pip sketched the scene with desperate precision. Every root, every curve of the brook, as though to preserve the oak on his map, if not in the ground. For what felt like hours, they fought the storm. Their paws bled, their fur clung, their muscles ached. But slowly, the ropes held. The mud piled high, and as dawn broke, pale light filtering through thinning clouds, the oak still stood. Exhausted, soaked, they collapsed in the clearing. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, glittering with raindrops. Birds began to sing tentative notes. Hazel leaned against the oak's trunk, pressing her paw to its bark. "You're safe," she whispered. "We all are." Pip unfurled his ruined, soaked parchment, but smiled. The lines had blurred, the ink had run, yet the oak remained the boldest mark on the page, as if refusing to vanish. "See," he murmured, "the tree will never be forgotten. Not while I keep mapping." Bramble, though exhausted, scribbled in his ledger. On the night of the great storm, the oak of Willow's watch stood fast. Not by magic, but by the hands of friends. And in that moment, Oak Hollow felt bound not just by home or story, but by the fierce certainty that together they could weather anything. In the days after the storm, the hollow worked to repair itself. Fallen branches were cleared, nests mended, burrows shored up. Hazel baked extra bread for neighbors who had lost stores of food. Bramble offered his shell for drying damp books salvaged from homes. Pip redrew the washed-out parts of his map. And Reed was quieter than usual. One morning, Hazel noticed him slipping away with a bundle beneath his cloak. Curious, she followed at a distance, careful not to intrude. He walked beyond the hollow, past the brook, and into a patch of woods Hazel rarely visited. There, to her surprise, Reed knelt and parted the undergrowth to reveal a hidden clearing. In its center grew a small garden, wild but carefully tended. Stalks of herbs swayed, blossoms of chamomile and calendula brightened the ground, and tall foxgloves stretched like watchful sentries. Hazel's eyes widened. She hadn't known Reed kept such a place. She waited until he left, then later asked him gently, "Reed, why didn't you tell us about your garden?" He looked startled, then lowered his gaze. "It's mine, my secret. I began it long ago when I first settled here. A place to try growing rare herbs without worry. If I failed, no one would know. If I succeeded, well, I could use the plants quietly." Hazel laid a paw on his. "But Reed, your garden is beautiful. Why hide something so full of life?" Reed's whiskers trembled. "Because sometimes I feel apart. You, Bramble, even Pip, you all share easily, openly. My work is quieter, and I've never wanted to burden anyone with my failures." Hazel squeezed his paw. "Reed, that's not burdening. That's sharing, and we'd be honored to know your work." The next day, Reed nervously led them all to the garden. Pip squealed with delight, scribbling notes for his map. Bramble nearly toppled into a patch of thyme as he rushed to catalog every plant. Thistle muttered about fussy weeds but stayed to help weed a patch. Hazel beamed, proud that Reed trusted them with a secret. Together they expanded the garden, planting rows of lavender, mint, and wild carrots. Reed showed them how each plant could heal or nourish. Pip insisted on drawing a great star on his map for the clearing, calling it Reed's secret garden. Now not so secret. That evening, as fireflies lit the clearing, Reed sat quietly with his friends, the garden fragrant around them. He realized that perhaps failure was less frightening when shared, and success far sweeter. Of all in Oak Hollow, Thistle the Hedgehog was most reluctant to speak of the past. He was gruff, practical, and avoided sentiment like nettles. But Hazel had long sensed a heaviness behind his prickly exterior. It revealed itself one evening as they sat by the brook, watching the sunset ripple across the water. Pip chattered about adding compass roses to his maps. Bramble debated whether to call the oak a guardian or a sentinel in his ledger, and Reed explained the properties of foxglove. Thistle, unusually quiet, finally spoke. "You all talk of keeping records, gardens, maps. You build things to last. But some things can't be kept." Hazel turned gently toward him. "What do you mean?" Thistle's gaze fixed on the brook. "Long ago, before I came here, I had a burrow, family, a brother. We were close. But one winter, I failed him. He wandered into the snow when I should have watched. He didn't come back. Since then, I don't build or plan. I just endure." The others fell silent. Even Pip, usually quick with words, had none. Hazel reached for his paw. "Thistle, you've carried this alone for too long." He bristled. "It's not a story worth telling. Not like Bramble's books or Pip's maps." Bramble set down his ledger. "All stories matter, Thistle, even the painful ones. Especially those." Reed added softly, "You didn't fail. You survived. And survival itself is a story." For a long time, Thistle said nothing. Then, at last, he let out a slow breath. Maybe staying here with all of you is how I keep going. I don't talk much, don't share much. But you become, well, family enough." Hazel's eyes warmed. "We are family, and we'll remember your brother, too, if you'll let us." Thistle nodded, eyes glistening faintly in the fading light. Pip quietly marked the brook on his map with a small symbol, a star, the same he used for Reed's garden. When Thistle saw it, he grunted. That mark doesn't mean much. But Hazel saw the way his paw lingered near it and knew it meant everything. Summer ripened into golden fullness. The storm was a memory now, though the oak bore scars at its roots where the flood had threatened to tear it down. Life in Oak Hollow had steadied, yet something stirred in the hearts of its creatures, a need for joy, for celebration, for remembering that beyond storms and sorrows, there was light. Hazel proposed it first, as she kneaded dough one morning. "What we need," she said, her paws dusted with flour, "is a festival, a gathering to remind us that we're not only survivors of storms, but keepers of joy. A night of lanterns." Pip's ears shot up. Lanterns? You mean lights floating in the air? Or on the water? Or both? Hazel smiled. Both. Everyone can craft their own lantern, carry it to the brook, and send it downstream with a wish. We'll hang others in the trees so the forest glows. Bramble immediately rifled through his papers. I read once about lantern festivals in the far north. Entire towns would glow like starlight brought to earth. Yes, this is worth recording. Oak Hollow's first festival of lanterns. Reed looked thoughtful. We'll need wax and oil for the flames, and sturdy reeds to make frames. It must be safe. I'll gather what's needed. Even Thistle, who muttered something about nonsense, was caught later carving wood with careful strokes. When Pip asked, he grunted, "A base. For my lantern. Can't have it tipping over, can we?" In the week that followed, the hollow buzzed with preparation. Hazel and the younger mice dipped scraps of cloth in dye made from berries, coloring the lantern's rich blues and reds. Pip cut delicate star shapes into paper sides so the light would shine through like constellations. Bramble wrote poems on thin vellum to paste on lanterns, declaring, "Words and light together are the best way to honor memory." When the night came, the hollow gathered by the brook. The air was warm, scented with mint and damp earth. Fireflies rose in clusters, adding their tiny sparks. Lanterns were hung in trees, glowing like fruit made of fire. Children squeaked with delight. Elders nodded with quiet approval. Hazel lifted the first lantern, shaped like a teardrop, painted in soft yellow. "This," she said, her voice warm, "is for all we've weathered together." She set it on the brook, and the current carried it away, flickering gently as it drifted into the night. One by one, others followed. Pip's lantern, shaped like a compass, spun as it floated. Bramble's bore lines of poetry about storms and oaks. Reeds glowed with a steady, calming light. Thistles, plain, sturdy, carved from wood, floated a bit slower than the others, but it carried a weight of meaning unspoken. When Pip asked what wish he'd made, Thistle only shrugged. But Hazel saw his eyes follow the lantern as though it were a star leading the way. The brook shimmered with a river of light, lanterns bobbing like dreams made visible. The festival stretched late, with singing, stories, and laughter echoing through the trees. And when the last lantern disappeared around the bend, the hollow knew it had made a new tradition, a reminder that storms could not dim the light they carried together. In the weeks that followed the Festival of Lanterns, Pip worked feverishly. Each day he scurried from hollow to brook to ridge, measuring, sketching, checking his notes. His paws were perpetually stained with charcoal. His whiskers twitched with excitement. Hazel noticed his exhaustion one morning as he slumped over a slice of blackberry tart. "Pip, you'll run yourself ragged," she chided. But Hazel, Pip squeaked, eyes bright, "I'm almost finished. The great map of Oak Hollow. Every path, every den, every bend in the brook, even Reed's garden. It's all there." Bramble peered at the sprawling parchment. Indeed, it was a marvel. The forest in miniature, dotted with symbols Pip had invented. trees marked with tiny crowns, burrows shaped like spirals, a brook twisting in careful blue strokes. At the center, bold and proud, stood Willow's Watch. This, Bramble declared, is history in the making, a map that will outlast storms. Pip, you've given Oak Hollow something no one else has. Still, Pip frowned. It's missing something. A map must tell not just where, but who. And I don't know how to show that. Hazel tilted her head. Why not mark the stories? A lantern for the festival, a star for Thistle's memory, a quill for Bramble, a loaf for my kitchen. That way, the map is alive with us. Pip's eyes widened. Yes, a map of places and people, of land and heart. So he added symbols, each small but brimming with meaning. Reed's garden became a mortar and pestle, Bramble's ledger a tiny book, Hazel's hearth a flame, and by the brook a lantern glowing forever. When at last the map was complete, they gathered to see it. Reed murmured, "This is more than a map. It's a memory." Even Thistle, who rarely praised, touched the parchment gently. "You've given us roots. And sometimes, Pip, roots matter more than you know." Pip beamed, his little chest swelling. "Then it's not just a map. It's our story," though she would never say it aloud. Hazel often worried that the others gave her too much credit. She was not a chronicler like Bramble, nor a healer like Reed, nor a dreamer like Pip. She could not face storms like Thistle. All she had, she thought, was her kitchen. But kitchens, as it turned out, mattered more than she realized. One chilly evening, as autumn crept near, Hazel found her home suddenly filled. Pip shivering from a too-long mapping excursion, Bramble clutching a damp ledger after rescuing from dew, Reed weary from hours tending to sickly badgers, and Thistle trudging in with burrs stuck to his spines. Without thinking, Hazel moved about her kitchen, kneading dough, stirring soup, setting cups of warm cider before them. Her home filled with scents of cinnamon and rosemary, the crackle of fire, the sound of spoons clinking. The other side, shoulders easing, weariness lifting. It was then Hazel realized her hearth was not small at all. It was the center, the anchor, where maps were admired, where chronicles were read, where wounds were soothed, where grief softened. That night, as the friends sat around the fire, Bramble spoke quietly. "Hazel, you've given us more than food. You've given us belonging." Pip nodded vigorously, crumbs dotting his whiskers. "Your kitchen is the heart of the map." Reed added, "And the heart of us all." Even Thistle muttered, "Not bad. Not bad at all." Hazel felt warmth spread deeper than the fire, deeper than the soup in her belly. She looked around at the friends gathered, lantern light flickering on their faces, and thought, this is the real feast. This is what lasts. And so, as autumn's chill set in, Oak Hollow knew that whatever storms, secrets, or sorrows might come, Hazel's hearth would always be waiting, steady, glowing enough. The turning of leaves brought a hush to Oak Hollow. The greens of summer had shifted into flames of amber and rust. Chestnuts dropped with soft thuds. The air smelled of wood smoke from distant chimneys. It was Reed who felt the change most keenly, for his garden, which had filled so many baskets in summer, was preparing to rest. He stood one morning among his beds, paws muddy, whiskers twitching as he pulled the last of the turnips. Beyond him, the bean poles rattled in the wind, stripped bare. The herbs had grown leggy, asking to be cut down. Even the proud sunflowers had bowed their golden heads. Hazel found him there, staring at the emptying rows. "You look as though you've lost a friend," she said gently. Reed gave a gruff laugh. "In a way, I have. Each season feels like its own companion. You learn its habits, its quirks. Autumn is harder. It teaches you to let go." Hazel nodded, then bent to help gather the last of the turnips. Soon Pip scampered over, insisting on carrying armfuls despite their size. Bramble shuffled up with a notebook to record what had grown well. Even Thistle arrived, muttering about not letting the mice ruin the soil, though he carefully dug with his claws so as not to harm the roots. Together they harvested, bundled, and stored what could be saved. Reed taught them how to braid onions and hang them in the rafters. Hazel spread herbs to dry on cloth by the fire. Pip was delighted to learn how to dig burrows for storing root vegetables, though he ate as many as he buried. That evening, as they sat before Reed's cottage with baskets piled high, the healer said quietly, "Perhaps it isn't about losing a friend, but preparing to meet them again. Spring will return. My garden will greet me anew. And in the meantime, we'll live on what it gave." Bramble, scratching away in his ledger, added, "Then we must write it down. Reed's Autumn Garden, a chapter about patience and about trusting that what rests will return." Reed gave a small smile, one that warmed them more than the fire. The next week brought a brisk wind, scattering leaves like golden coins. Pip, restless as ever, begged to explore the deeper parts of the oak wood where chestnuts grew thick. Thistle agreed to accompany him, muttering about keeping the little one out of trouble, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of his old curiosity. The wood was hushed, save for the rustle of squirrels leaping branch to branch. Pip darted from tree to tree, stuffing his satchel with glossy brown nuts. Thistle, slower and more methodical, tested each one before pocketing it. They came upon a hollow beneath an old oak where chestnuts had gathered in a heap, half buried under leaves. Pip squealed, a treasure trove. He dove in headfirst, scattering husks. Thistle chuckled despite himself. But as they gathered the hoard, Pip asked, "What do you do with so many? We can't eat them all." Thistle was silent for a moment, then said, "You save them. For winter. For others who may need them more than you. When the snow comes, there'll be creatures without enough. A hidden cache might mean survival." Pip looked up wide-eyed. "So, it's like a secret gift?" "Yes," Thistle said softly. "A gift the giver may never see received." Together they carried armfuls back toward the hollow, stashing them in nooks among roots and under rocks. Pip insisted on marking each cache with a small drawing scratched into bark. A star, a leaf, a lantern. Thistle only shook his head, but his eyes softened. When they returned, Hazel scolded them for tracking mud into her kitchen, but smiled when she saw the baskets brimming with chestnuts. And later, as Pip drifted off to sleep, he whispered to himself, "A gift unseen, a gift for winter." Thistle, settling into his burrow, allowed a small sigh. Perhaps the old wounds in his heart were not so far from healing after all. As autumn deepened, the nights grew longer, and Bramble found himself working late by lamplight. His ledger now spanned many pages, filled with accounts of storms, festivals, gardens, and caches. Yet he often wondered, would anyone truly care to read it? Would the creatures of Oak Hollow see value in these scribblings? Hazel noticed his furrowed brow as he shuffled pages one evening. "You've gone quiet, Bramble." "It's nothing," the badger murmured. "Only, sometimes I fear my words are nothing more than scratches on paper. Who will read them when I am gone?" Hazel tilted her head. Why not let them be read now? So the next night, after supper, she announced a gathering in her kitchen. Reed brought cider, Pip curled on the hearthrug, and even Thistle took a corner seat, pretending disinterest. Bramble sat at the table, paws trembling slightly as he opened his ledger. He read aloud, the account of the storm, the rebuilding of Willow's watch, the festival of lanterns, Reed's autumn harvest, Thistle's hidden caches. His voice grew steadier with each page, and soon the kitchen was filled not only with the scent of rosemary bread, but with laughter, sighs, and murmured recollections. Pip squeaked, "That's me. That's my compass lantern." Hazel wiped a tear at the mention of her hearth. Reed nodded solemnly at the garden's chapter. Even Thistle gave a low grunt of approval. When Bramble finally closed the book, silence lingered, warm and full. Hazel touched his paw. Your words are not scratches. They're roots binding us together. For once, Bramble. Her name was Mallow, and she had come from the far side of the ridge in search of kin she'd hoped to visit before winter closed in. But the snow had hidden landmarks, and hunger had driven her off course. For days she stayed among them, regaining strength. Pip followed her endlessly, asking what the ridge looked like, whether the snow was deeper there, if the stars shone brighter. Mallow laughed weakly at his questions, but her eyes carried shadows. Hazel noticed it first, the way Mallow looked toward the window, as though searching for something. Reed asked gently, and at last she admitted, I don't know if my kin survived the autumn fever. I meant to bring herbs, but I was too late. Silence fell heavy. Bramble closed his ledger. Thistle looked away. It was Reed who said, Then you've found kin here, until you are ready to walk again. And so Mallow became part of their days, helping Hazel peel apples, accompanying Reed to check on the sick hedgehogs, even sitting beside Thistle by the fire. Slowly, the shadows in her eyes eased. On the night she finally prepared to leave, Hazel packed bread and dried herbs into her satchel. Pip slipped in one of his tiny star markers, whispering, So you'll never be lost. As she stepped into the snowy dusk, lantern light behind her, Mallow turned back once. Your hollow glows brighter than any ridge. If ever I find myself lost again, I will follow that glow. And with that, she was gone, footprints soon swallowed by snow. The snow deepened until travel was scarce. Days shortened into early darkness, and nights stretched like endless blankets. Hazel worried that the stillness might fray tempers or stir sorrow, but Bramble proposed something new, a storytelling circle. Not chronicles, not facts, he said, lifting his quill, but tales of dreams, of nonsense, of whatever comes to mind. Let's make the long night shorter with stories. And so, one evening, the kitchen filled once more. Hazel ladled stew, Pip perched on a stool, Reed lit an extra lantern, and Thistle settled with his spines bristling. Bramble began, his voice rich as he spun a tale of a mole who dug so far he found a hidden kingdom of glowing stones. Pip gasped and insisted the mole must have found treasure. Hazel chuckled. Next came Reed, who told a quieter tale, of a fox who learned the language of owls by listening, truly listening, until he could call for guidance on the darkest nights. His words made the fire crackle with an almost reverent hush. Hazel, blushing, offered her story of a little loaf of bread that rolled away from its oven, determined to see the world. Along the way, it made friends of sparrows and hedgehogs, until at last it found its way home, more seasoned than ever. The others laughed, Pip clutching his belly. Then, to everyone's surprise, Thistle spoke. His voice was low, almost hesitant. I once heard a hedgehog who feared nothing. Not snow, not storms, not even foxes. But he discovered the bravest thing he could do was let someone walk beside him. Silence fell. Hazel's eyes glistened. Reed nodded deeply. Pip whispered, That's the best one yet. Bramble quickly scribbled the stories into his ledger, smiling. So tonight, Oak Hollow has not just one ledger, but many. Tales to warm us when the snow is deepest. As the night drew on, the kitchen glowed with more than lantern light. It glowed with shared words, shared laughter, and the simple magic of voices weaving threads against the dark. And in the hush after, when only the snow whispered outside, Hazel thought, perhaps stories are their own kind of hearth, one that follows you even when the fire dies down. The end. Thank you for joining us in the quiet corners of Chestnut Hollow. If you enjoyed this story and would like to wander with us again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others who love cozy woodland adventures. Until next time, May your days be gentle and your evenings restful.